Hello, welcome to another episode, our first live episode of 2022 of Fresh Natural Live. And Happy New Year to everyone. And I hope you enjoyed last week's show. There's a little bit of a glitch in uploading those video recordings. And we actually aired it on Tuesday instead of Monday. But anyway, we have a great show tonight as usual. We've talked about this concept a fair amount during other shows, this whole concept of genetically modified organisms, or GMOs, if you are familiar with. And there's often a lot of talk about it. And there's often question, well, does GMO matter? What effects does it have on us? Is there a lot of science as to the health benefits or potential adverse health effects of genetically modified foods? And so, my esteemed colleague and friend, Dr. Pam Atkins, is going to lead us into discussion on this. I think this is very important. I personally have recently started buying most of my produce from local growers. And one thing I've noticed when I, look at produce in some sections of the farmers markets, I know there's a certain amount of diversity within the produce. If it's grown in the garden, the peppers have different shapes and looks to them. Pretty much if you walk out into, say, a busy city area, people walking, different heights and sizes and shapes and things like that. If you go into the supermarket and you look at the bell peppers, there's a certain amount of uniformity to it. They all look the same. And I think I made this comment on a show before. Just imagine if you were to walk out into the streets and everybody looked exactly the same. You would kind of look around and say, there's something wrong with this picture. And so I think we should take that attitude about our food. So this whole concept of GMO foods, I think, is the one that we need to delve into, and we're going to do exactly that tonight. So stay tuned. We have a great show for you tonight. Get your pens and pencils out. I think you're going to get a lot of great information. So look forward to seeing you on the other side. Okay, welcome back. And as I said before, we're going to talk about this concept of GMO. We're going to take it head on tonight. I think it's a very important concept because as we frequently talk about, what we put in our system food-wise is very important. It's really our natural medicines. And so, what's done to the food before we get it is really important. So without further ado, I'm going to bring my friend and colleague on, Dr. Atkins. How are you doing, Dr. Pamela Atkins? We're going to have the other Dr. Atkins on tonight, perhaps pretty soon.
Hi.
So I have to use first and last name. How are you doing today?
Doing good, hanging in here.
And so
share this information.
Her partner in crime, Dr. Floyd Atkins. Hello, sir. How are you doing today? I think you're on mute still.
Okay, how about that? How are you doing?
Yeah, that sounds perfect. Yeah, welcome to the show. Happy New Year. And
you.
we're going to be taking on this whole concept of GMO. The issue of GMO. There was a while where I would give some thought to it, but not much. And I said, well, I don't know. And I remember hearing someone give a talk, and they made the point, well, foods they grow, and the seeds kind of they cross germinate, and there's some natural aspect of how foods evolve, and so there's a natural GMO, if you will. But is that truly different than what we know of that happens in the food laboratories? And so I really would like to get into that whole concept. So Dr. Atkins, what is GMO, and kind of help us get started with that whole concept. And what is GMO, and is it good for us, bad for us? How do we start this discussion? Oops, you muted.
Genetically modified organisms or food is when they take a species of food or plant or animal or insect and they cross it with a species, another species, unlike species, and they're trying to achieve some type of quality, especially in food, and so they insert this DNA and combine this DNA and to produce these qualities, but there are potentials for adverse effects that we're not having considered. But I'm thinking sometimes we don't always think about health. We just think about what makes it easy, maybe less insects or more resistant to a herbicide or can have a longer shelf life and things like that. So that's what the food industry has developed. So it's, genetic engineering.
So, JB has a hard time finding grapes with seeds in them. You have, and the grapes can be labeled organic, but they won't have seeds.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that?
Right. I think, if you have grapes or watermelon with no seeds, I wouldn't buy it because that's naturally how it comes. But I think that we, have been spoiled and they say, okay, we'll take out the seeds, but it is not the way God has made it. It's not the way that was designed for us. And so things have happened to make it seedless.
Yeah, that's, it's interesting you mentioned that because I'm going to bring, lots of people in the plant-based community, like to quote Genesis 1:29.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll do a quick screen share here because it's, and I'm not trying to preach to anyone, but I thought it was pretty interesting that if you look at some of the scriptures, and God said, behold, I've given you every herb bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in which it is fruit of the tree yielding seed, to you it shall be meat. So this whole concept of bearing seed and yielding seed is one that, it's borne out in the scriptures. Now, whether someone believes the scripture or not, I mean, that's another issue. But, I think there's something to be said for, food existing in its natural state. And if it's natural food to have seeds, then, and you're eating food that doesn't have seed, there's something to that. What do we know? What information do we have on in terms of some of the scientific evidence? Has anyone done any studies looking at, the issue with genetically modified foods versus non-GMO foods?
Yeah, I have some slides I can share with you. Are they ready, Dr. Lloyd?
While you pull it out, hello, JB, Leslie Coleman. I want to say hello to everyone. Dellum, hello to everyone, and Peter Simon. Hello, everyone who's signing into the chat. A few people are signing in here today. And while you pull that up, I mentioned, to the group, the different aspects of GMO, and that's certainly the genetic engineering of it, making it resistant to pesticides, making it last longer on the shelf. There are different components of those things, and there's certainly a convenience to all of this, and we love this convenience. But are we paying a price for this convenience? And there's a convenience of sitting in the house all day or lying in bed all day. That's pretty convenient. But are we paying a price for that? And so let's start to look at the scientific breakdown. I want to welcome Dr. Celeste Palmer to the stage here.
Hello.
And I'll bring this comment off here. And so GMO has got to go. I love that. So I think based on the title, we know where you stand on GMO.
Well, I guess yes, it says it all there, but we have to, we have to take care of our bodies and we have to make choices for our bodies. So, with that being said, as we said, the DNA material from certain species of plants or are combined with DNA of different viruses and vectors or animals or fish or scorpions to create the desired effect, whatever the engineers have desired to happen. So that's what genetically modified is. And so in 1992, the FDA decided that they regarded genetically modified foods as just traditional foods and no different than hybridized foods. And so they really just let their guard down and didn't really require any studies, any scientific studies or testing, etc., to approve genetically engineered foods. So there were scientists, that's FDA scientists, that spoke out and said that there is a profound difference, unexpected effects from traditional breeding and genetic engineering. So there were scientists that disagreed, but they were overruled by the administrators. And so now we have genetically engineered genetic GMO foods. Now, the genetic engineers proposed that this is why we have genetically engineered food. They say, oh, it's a higher crop yield. So we can provide more food to hungry people. And sometimes you'll see videos or references to the Irish potato famine back in the 1800s and how there was a drought and problems with potatoes. So people went hungry. So that is one reasoning they use, that we can feed more people and they can send food to Africa and other third world countries. However, some countries will not accept their genetically modified food, but that we send. But that's one. The other thing is they say it reduced farm costs, but we've heard from farmers and they don't always agree with that. It also say it increases the profit. I guess we have more produce can increase the profit. They say it's safer for the environment, and we will find out that is not correct. And they say can produce more nutritious foods. Well, sometimes they say they can engineer a food if they want. For example, there was an example of a rice that they wanted more vitamin A because in some Asian countries they felt they had a big, the rice was a big staple and they weren't getting enough vitamin A, so they made a rice, a yellow rice with vitamin A. But and this was actually this happened in the United States. Some of the farmers, but the rice that was produced, was genetically engineered, and it soon got into the rice supply, and 30% of the rice became genetically modified, and the farmers had problems with their crops and their food and their land. It was a big mess, and Monsanto was sued over this, and the farmers, the two farmers that sued, won. So there are issues, but that's what the reasoning proposed to use make genetically modified foods. The Center for Safety, Food Safety, is an organization that's been around 20 years, and it is not under the FDA. I think FDA has something similar, but it's not the FDA organization, but it's promoting organic, ecologically sustainable alternatives for food. And they cited 6 potential human concerns with genetic engineering and genetic modified foods. And so we're going to talk about these 6: toxicity, antibiotics, immune suppression, cancer, allergic reactions, and nutrition.
Okay.
So, talk about toxicity. So talk about toxicity with genetic engineering. The producers that the genetic engineering producers were never fully aware of when they inserted this genetic material, or sometimes they call it a cassette, where it's inserted in the other genetic material of the other organism, and how safe is it? They hoped that the genetic material would not destabilize the food or make it harmful. That was the hope. And so FDA scientists warned, some of the scientists in the FDA spoke up and warned the FDA and were concerned that it may increase the levels of toxicants. And when they talk about toxicants, these are like man-made chemicals that you find in the environment, like benzene, and herbicides and pesticides, and all breakdown products of all this of the industry. And they said the appearance of these toxicants may increase the capability of concentrating toxic substance may increase, that our bodies may concentrate more of these substances instead of getting rid of them. And so they were very concerned. And there's an example of this tomato called the Calgene Flavor Savor tomato. This was the very first food that the FDA approved and put on the market that was genetically engineered. And this was in 1994. And it was found later that the rats that were fed this tomato developed stomach lesions. And the FDA had approved this tomato against concerns of scientists, no pre-marketing testing. They just put it on the market. And in around 1997, it just kind of disappeared from the market. And I was trying to research what happened, and all I could find was one of the marketing people representing the company, which was affiliated with Monsanto, said it was a money loss, or that it wasn't, it cost more for them, the cost ratio, and they just took it off. But that was the very first one.
Did the data on the rat lesions, the stomach lesions in the rats, was that data available to the FDA before they approved it? Did that come out later as opposed to?
I think it came out later because they really didn't authorize studies. So I think, but I'm not sure about this, that the timing of it, because it's hard to find some of this information for some reason.
Some reason, yeah.
Yeah.
That's sounds kind of familiar, FDA approving things without adequate scientific studies, but go ahead.
So yes, there's some, anyways, the antibiotic resistance is another concern, and with genetically modified foods, they may cause bacteria-resistant strains of bacteria to antibiotics. We know that many genetically engineered foods, they use an antibiotic resistant marker that helps to identify that something like that. I'm sorry. I had a smoothie, little pieces of berry in my throat. So anyway, these markers to help identify these antibiotic resistant markers to identify where the genetic material is. So they use that just to kind of locate it, but it has created more antibiotic resistance. So one example is Novartis. There's a BT maize or corn, that has been genetic engineered, and it has a it was combined with has an ampicillin resistant gene. So
Hmm.
so this, for people that consume corn, it is possible that it can increase the risk of developing resistance to ampicillin, which is a fairly inexpensive antibiotic to treat infections in children and adults. And so when you develop more resistant strains of bacteria, you're creating more expensive antibiotics all the time and risking infections that may not be resistant, where you have limited antibiotics to use against the bacterial infection.
That's an interesting point because, when I think about antibiotic resistance of microorganisms, and I remember in my training, if somebody came in with a community acquired pneumonia, uh, it would say, okay, you treat them with penicillin or ampicillin because, the bug came from the community and you wouldn't have a lot of antibiotic resistance in the community. Because the antibiotic resistance is mostly hospital. So if it's we call it nosocomial being a hospital-acquired infection, then that's more likely to have antibiotic resistance. And so, that was the standard rule and teaching. But over time, you're seeing more antibiotic-resistant microbes come out of the community. Now, the interesting thing about the point you just made is that I was always of the thought process, and perhaps it's still true, that the big contribution to antibiotic resistance are the antibiotics that are used in the animal products. And so the animal protein that's consumed. So a lot of people are being exposed to antibiotics in the community based on the animal protein of the cows and the chickens and all of that. But now you're posing something different. Now you have the corn, which may have introduce some level of ampicillin resistance. And so, the genetically engineering process may be contributing to the community acquired antibiotic resistant microbes in addition to the animal approach. Now, I know you're going to address this later on. I'm going to throw this question up now. We don't have to address it now, but it's a great set of questions. How do you know if you're buying GMO? Does organic mean GMO? I know the answer to this first part here. And how do we know these corporations are being honest? Dr. Palmer, put a pin on that and help us come back to that later as we get in our discussion. So immune suppression. Oh, okay.
Yeah, so we're wondering what does it do? What does the genetically engineered foods do to our immune system? And there was a journal, Lancet journal, published article from Dr. Buzzati and Dr. Ewan under a grant from the British government. Somehow we see a lot of these studies from other countries, rarely from the United States. I imagine it's hard to get funding in the United States for these type of studies. But what he found was, or they found, was with the consumption of the genetically engineered potato, which contained the BT or Bacillus thuringiensis, and they found that this potato had some effect on the laboratory rats that affect organ development, affect body metabolism, and it affected the immune system. And so once this study came out, this doctor, especially Dr. Buzzati, the lead doctor, was under attack by the industry, the biotechnology industry. And but they said, as with as of today, his study still stands. It can't be refuted. And there were 22 leading scientists that later came out and supported what he said. And they said there's definitely a link between the genetically engineered food and suppression of the immune system.
And this is important because obviously everybody's worried about immune system function this time of year, and particularly during this pandemic, as the people are concerned about coronavirus. And so, the food we consume has a big impact on our health. And so, again, it's an interesting piece of data there about the genetic engineering of the food and how it can adversely affect us.
Yes, and so the other factor was cancer. How does this genetic engineering, what effect can it have on cancer? And so in 1993, FDA approved the use of the bovine growth hormone, the RBGH, that is used diffusely in dairy cows and dairy industry. And if you have any milk products, you know, that's non-organic, non-GMO, it probably is in it. And this they found out that this growth hormone will increase the level of IGF, or the growth factor IGF-1. And I think some of your tests, they test for that. And this is a growth factor that is linked to stimulating breast cancer cells, prostate cancer cells, colon cancer cells, and it's in dairy products.
Hmm.
So, so that's a concern. So, that's why I always tell my patients that are concerned, and we're on a preventive path to get off of milk and cheese and animal products like that, and because of those concerns. In Canada and Europe rejected the use of this hormone, and they recognized a study that the FDA had failed to recognize that showed that that growth hormone, when digested, it passed through to the intestine and the bloodstream. It was believed that it was destroyed in the stomach with the gastric acid, but it can pass, and so that is a concern.
Dr. Atkins, can I add in something too?
Yes.
This is just something that I often remind my patients of, is that even without the recombinant bovine growth hormone, milk is a growth hormone. By nature, it is the way that mother cows pass their growth factors to their baby, to their calf. So we have to just keep in mind that it is a growth hormone, no matter how you slice it.
Yes.
And I just want to just throw this question, put a pin in this one, Dr. Palmer. We'll come back to it. Why is the FDA allowed to operate so irresponsibly? That's a hot question. We'll get to that later. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Allergic reaction.
So as far as how does it contribute to allergic reactions? Genetically engineered food can be transmitted to other foods, or the genetic material they can transmit to other foods and cross different foods together. And so foods that we may not think normally that we may have an allergy or sensitivity to, people are reacting to. And why is that? Well, there was one example, the New England Journal of Medicine reported that there was a gene that was combined from Brazil nut with the soy gene. And so people that have nut allergies, could potentially have reactions to soy products. And soy is in everything. And, it's soybean oils in a lot of foods and processed foods, and soy protein. So people can unknowingly have an allergic reaction that think they're only allergic to nuts. So that is one concern. And other concern is just that the allergy reactions are on the rise. So we think there are more cross reactivities going on with other foods, more and more foods being genetically engineered. And that is a concern. And I was thinking if I have a friend that, talked about, when she carries an EpiPen, and, she went somewhere and she had some type of food, and she felt she was having some reaction. And fortunately, it wasn't a serious reaction, but she said everything in there was nothing I was sensitive to. I asked the waiter and found out the ingredients, but we may not know. So it's,
Yeah, and so it raised a level of complexity, because we have a lot of patients that come in and say, I'm allergic to the food, I'm allergic to that food. And the question is, are you allergic to that food, or is there some aspect of that food? And you have, these allergists who do these extensive allergy tests. So, well, you're allergic to this food, and this food. And then the question is, what's the source of the, allergen? Are they getting, I don't know anything, the first thing about an allergy test, but are they getting their, allergens from antigens from genetically modified sources, or they're from pure antigens, or whatever the case may be? So where their food antigens coming from in the allergy test, and then people who have frank allergies, are they allergic to the genetically modified version or the real version? I've already said it's unnatural to be allergic to nature. And so maybe they're not allergic to natural foods, they're allergic to unnatural foods. And that's essentially what they're exposed to.
But there's another level of complexity with this, is that we don't really spend time in nature. So and what I mean by that is eating nature. So if we don't eat it, the body doesn't get to equilibrate to it. And so then when we do see it for the first time, now we have a reaction to it.
Yeah. And these adverse reactions they're not necessarily IgE modified, IgE mediated immune responses, but rather, hey, I feel bad, or I feel achy, or I feel whatever. And they could be all kinds of biochemical reactions that people say I'm allergic to this because I have this reaction. But you're right. There are a lot of factors involved, with this. And so we just put the stamp allergy and just move on. And we don't spend time thinking about it, investigating it, and understanding it. But there's a lot to be understood here, especially in terms of what happens to our food.
Yeah, so it can be inflammatory triggers and things like that, but I think it's, like you said, it's not always just an IgE reaction, but there's some IgG reactions that some people call allergies, but maybe, inflammatory. But
let me ask you this question. So let's say, I don't know, you've got some food scattered on the table. Is there a methodology by which one could analyze the food and determine whether it's genetically modified or not? Granted, grapes without seeds, okay, that we've got that one. But let's say a spinach leaf, and let me leave corn out. It's mostly just, let's say spinach or tomatoes. Can you? Is there something else you can do?
Oh, okay. You almost need to be a scientist, because they can, the scientists can look at to investigate to see if it is, but sometimes we can't do it with our eye and looking at it, like you said, other than, whether it has seeds or not. That could be hybridized, or it could be genetically modified, but you're right, we can't. Reading labels is going to be something we can do, but if we don't know we don't know about the labels, then that we're kind of in the dark. But they said when they brought the genetically engineered food to the forefront, they said that, it could be more nutritious. But what we're finding is that the scientists were concerned that there was a potential change. There would be a potential change for the worse for nutrition value, and I think they're right. I think I don't think the majority of food is more nutritious. Scientists were concerned that there would be an altered level of nutrients also in the food. So that is another concern. As far as identification, reading labels, I try to teach my patients to read labels and read the numbers on foods. And most of us, they try to eat clean. And when you buy organic, if you're not going to a community garden or local grower, you want to see nines. You want to see 5 digits, and a 9 is the first digit. We know that's organic. If it's conventionally grown and not necessarily organic, it will start with a 3 or 4 and have 4 digits. But if it is genetically modified, it should have 5 digits starting with the 8. So we want to be aware of those 8s. And, things are changing all the time. So we have to kind of keep up with if there's any additional change going on in the future with labeling. But
But how about the organic grapes and organic watermelon that have no seeds? I mean, they'll have a 9 in front of them, but they have no seeds, and so they must be genetically modified.
well, they're hybridized, probably hybridized, but probably not genetically modified.
So
They're
explain the
hybridized.
difference for our audience.
Yeah. So that means taking a portion of one fruit and combining with the other, like you may have like broccolini or something like that, where it's changed to bring on a certain behavior or a sweeter carrot, etc. There are some, some authorities that really want us to back away from hybridization, and we want to eat more vegetables as the original state. That's why you have the what they call it, the heirloom tomatoes and heirloom vegetables and things like that, because we know they haven't been changed from many years, but many times they change it, just to, make it sweeter, less seeds, things of that nature. But it's hard to find watermelon sometimes without seeds, unless you go to a health food store, and sometimes it may be hard there.
I mean, the hybridization, I understand what you're saying there, but I just don't understand how hybridization will get rid of the seeds. It seems like that's a huge change. I mean, if you kind of combine two, you get a kind of confluence of two types of foods. But, part of me thinks that they're just mislabeling a lot of things. But again, I don't know.